legacy burdens and gifts and heirlooms. So I want to really say that I don't want to just concentrate on legacy burdens. This is a sort of call out for looking at your legacy, looking at what you have taken in, what the rules and what's come through the generations, your family generation, your own genetic ancestry, the culture, what you've taken in from culture. Some people would also talk about the soul legacy of karmic loops and where you might have taken in things from, you choose to be here with the same set of people. For example, I absolutely love boats, and I've had 2 narrow boats and I love them, and I never understood that. What I've found out is that all 4 of my grandparents, their lines, have had people that have taken transatlantic crossings, and to live. So weirdly, it makes sense that I love water, I love boats. I love adventuring, I love trying out new things. I've got whole lovely gifts of, trying things out. That to me is a sort of gift. This isn't all about, let's look at all the really heavy stuff. There's a lot of heavy stuff, but there's also the lovely stuff, the joy, community, kindness, care. These are things that have hopefully come through the generations. If you go back 20 generations, that's thousands and thousands of people. If they hadn't had sex, you wouldn't be here. And hopefully many of those were from good relations. We don't know, but many of them would have been. So, but legacy burdens are the things that we have taken on that are difficult, that have come from difficult situations that happened years and years ago, difficult traumas that have then people have then taken on more extreme parts, and that they've then come through the generations in rules, in ways of being that parents and community members pass on to their kids, and then the kids then pass on. In the Bible, I never quote the Bible, but in the Bible, they talk about the sins of the fathers shall be passed on to the, and down 7 generations. And actually that's been shown to be the case. There's Brian Dias of Emory did a study about male rats who were, sorry, this is a little pad up alert, they were given a very small electric shocks on their paws when apple blossom was introduced into their cages. 2 weeks later, they impregnated a female rat, and then their babies, when they grew up, were introduced to a little bit of cherry blossom or apple blossom, and the babies had a major reaction. And then that happened again, and another, and it went down 7 generations that the babies kept reacting to the apple blossom. Rachel Yehuda did a study about cortisol levels of mums that were pregnant in New York around the time of 7/11, and how their babies had very similar cortisol levels. So this is the sort of epigenetic memory that gets passed down. The DNA doesn't change, but the reading of the DNA changes. If you just think about your own family history of the traumas, I don't know if grandparents were in the war, but there's a lot of things that have been passed down through the generations, potentially, and that might not be yours. Anne Cinco writes, legacy involves family values, rules and loyalties, and involves implicit contracts we make with our parents, governing everything from how we eat to how we respond to death. So our choice of profession, our choice of partner, self-care, health. So gifts are the good things that are passed down. O.C. Arbel distinguishes that heirlooms are the qualities that are found after the legacy burden's been released. probably the original intention that might have been walked by the burden. So, some questions to ponder, some starters. Just thinking of your own family, your own situation. Who in your family from back then that you might have known had chronic or acute illnesses in previous generations? If you have an illness, does the severity of your symptom fit with your own life experience? Do your symptoms make sense? If there's something you're doing and there's a strong energy about it, is it mine? Is this very strong viewpoint that I have, is it mine? Has it always been there? When did I start to believe it? I've just always believed it. Are you hearing things like, my parents had this too? It's been with me forever. Do you know about substance abuse, domestic abuse? Can you trace that back? What are the rules your parents grew up with? What did they teach you? What did your parts hear? Family often passes down rules of shame, such as control, perfectionism, blame, denial, unreliability, and not talking about shameful, abusive or compulsive behaviours. Do you have rules about when you need to be silent about things? When do you look away? When to speak up? Should you be devoted to family? Is it okay to cut off? What's it like to be white? What's your feelings about being white? What's your feeling about being a man or a woman? Do you have rules about what women are, what men are, what brown-skinned people are, how are disabled people for you? What might you have taken on? How about sexuality, individualism, class? How about our Britishness, about, if some of us are British, some of us aren't here, empire, colonialism? What are the rules there? What are the viewpoints? Interestingly, if you can look back in your family, who was anxious? Who was depressed? If you can, and we'll do a question in a minute, but if the depression has come down through the generations and we find out that 80% isn't yours, and we can unburden that, 20% is so much more easy to work with than 100%. And we can let go of that. How amazing is that? And of course, on the other hand, where was the light in your own families? Where was the community? Where was the kindness? Where was the joy, the adventuring, the fun, the sensuality? Where was, what's come down through your family? Several roots. OC says, she has a game, and we'll do a little bit in our meditation. Things my parents said and my parts heard. So, brainstorming in your head, messages, I think you might have been doing that while I've been talking, that you've heard from parents or the outside world. You can ask inside, grab a friend or a therapist. Daniel Ford does an amazing course on ancestral medicine to start getting in contact with your ancestors. Anyone can do it. You don't need to have a special gift. Go and do some family constellations. There's several people in Stroud that do it, certainly in Bath and Bristol, and just see what you find. So you can, like the round table that we were talking about earlier, you can contact your ancestors inside and go on a journey. If your parents or grandparents are still living, how about asking them? Interview them and just see what they remember. You could do a genogram with them. Genogram is like a family tree, and you just sort of can look through the generations and you can trace them a little bit. You could have a go on ancestry and start mapping out your families and just seeing where you came from. And once you go back a couple of generations, often there are loads of others that have been doing the same work, and that you suddenly can find stories and connections that you didn't realise happened. I love doing this, and I've gone back ages, and oh my God, how interesting how I've turned out. Finding out that all 4 of my ancestors did massive trips and cut off from their community and never went back. So Ireland off to Carbonear in Newfoundland, Germany to New York, England to South Africa and Asia and Barbados, Scotland to Australia. How extraordinary. So total cut-off. And I found that out from researching my family trees. Also, you can do a DNA test and find out, a little bit more about where these old ancestors originally came from. Really encourage you, to find out a little bit more. And then another way would be finding a shaman or a soul worker to find out a little bit more about your soul legacies in maybe past lives, that sort of thing. So, Dick Schwartz, who was the originator of the internal family systems model, Park's work's been going for years, but he brought together internal family systems. He's worked with this amazing woman, Duran Young, and they've looked at the legacy burdens of the US. And I would like to encourage all of us to look at the legacy burdens of the UK too. They named, just put it to him, they named racism, individualism, materialism, what else here? I'm going class, I'm going stoicism, reserve, hereditary stuff from, we have a monarchy, we have hereditary lords, colonialism, empire will have had a massive impact on our national psyche. So I am going to give you a little personal story, and I have parts that I'm a little bit anxious about feeling exposed, but I'm going to admit it that I have racist parts. And it's so much easier for me to say I have racist parts and I have racist legacy than to say I am a racist. I like that. The structure of IFS enables me to do that. So, what I learned when I've spent the last few months looking at this in my own personal therapy, and I've looked at my family legacy, and I look at my dad's side, and they were achingly poor and moved from Ireland and Germany, and they were fisher folk, or they were, and they arrived in New York, and you can imagine in New York the melting pot in the beginning of last century. I had a cousin who was on Broadway writing songs, and it was specifically about that melting pot, and it was a satirical take on immigration in New York at that time, of this, being in, it's called McNally's Row of Flats, and it's all about the very close connections of everybody in very poor housing in New York at that time. But it's not surprising that my dad's legacy then comes as fear of others. They were small-scale folk from Ireland or whatever, and they are then suddenly cooped up in very small environments with people that they have never met, and there is the fear. And so the fear then got covered by a legacy of racism. On the other side of my family is my mother's side, which is much more privileged, and I look back and I have legacy of colonialism, of tea plantations. I have legacy of slave plantations, and that's really, it feels really exposing for me to say that. But what I notice is the legacy for me is this: there's a disdain, there's a hauteur that has come down through the generations that I have taken on. And in my own therapy, I look at that and I go, okay, and I can feel it physically in my body. It's a sort of, looking down on people. And I can look down on white people too. I can look down on anyone, or this part can. But I trace it back, and my mum had it, my grandmother had it, and looking in, when I was doing my IFS work, I could go back to being in a country where I'm not wanted. My ancestors, talking with them inside, it's really frightening being in a country where you're not wanted. And, outside your gates, there's a lot of people that don't like you. What I got was the fear. So what you do with the fear is that you put on this hauteur, this disdain for others. It's absolutely not to excuse it. Absolutely not to excuse it. But isn't it interesting that in my experience, most legacy comes from fear, or comes from a something, and then the burdens and the parts come in to protect and perpetrate. I have ancestors that perpetrate. And I'm going to say that this stops here. And that, we can be cycle breakers. We can absolutely be cycle breakers, and I choose to do that. I don't want to pass that on to my children. I don't want them to have this hauteur, this disdain, this fear and distrust of others. And so, there we go, that was personal story. So Seth Cappold, who is an IFS member, he does IFS parenting group. He says that, what you don't want, you can open the window and you can blow out. Love that. So there's an awful lot here, and there's an awful lot of work to do, and some of it you can just do by opening the window and blowing out. You don't have to do all of this at once, you can just do little bits. The IFS way of working with legacy burdens is imagining your children in front of you. You can invite children that you are with on a frequent basis, the future legacies. You invite them to come and imaginarily be in front of you. You don't want to be passing on your legacy. So you imagine them in front of you if they want to come. You could do it physically as well, but mostly it's imaginary. And you ask them to take out the burden that they have carried through that you've inadvertently passed on. And you could imagine putting it in a pot or a suitcase or Hermione Granger's magic handbag. And so physically they can take out their burden, the fear, the distrust, the abandonment, the rejection, whatever the burden is, goes in. The words, the behaviours go into some sort of imaginary pot. I take it out of my body, I put it into my pot, and I imagine my ancestors behind me. And I ask them, do you want, is it okay? Would you take this burden back? Because you're talking to the higher, you're talking to the selves, the higher selves of your ancestors, and mostly they want to take it. Sometimes they don't, and you just work in an IFS way. But often they want to heal. They don't want to be holding these awful burdens. So you're handing them the object, and they can let go of the burden that they inadvertently handed on. And it goes into the pot, and it goes back. You can ask about, is there anything you want me to know? Is there anything you want me to witness? Often they don't, because it's a burden that's just been passed on. Sometimes there's a story. I've had stories about some of my burdens. Sometimes there isn't, it's just been forgotten. You might find out amazing things. And then eventually it gets back to as far as you want it to get back, or it feels like it's right to get back. And then you ask, how do I want to unburden it? And we can burn it. You can imagine, you invite the ancestors to come and have a big fire, or chuck into an ocean, or down a river. You can send it up to the light. But it doesn't, the important thing is it's transmuted into lots of different pieces, and so that it doesn't come back. And then you ask, how's that? And I've not really had anyone experience that it feels worse. Most people feel lighter. And so then you ask, what was missing? What could we have back into the system? What was missing? What got lost when that burden got started? Was it connection, love, warmth, courage? I don't know what. Somehow you'll know what it is to come back. And then the whole line can take that on. And it can carry on. And you can feel it. So very importantly, before you've got your ancestors behind you, you might spend a little bit of time getting to know them, thanking them for showing up. Then starts the relationship between you and your ancestors, you and your parts, and you and your ancestors. Suddenly you've got much connection internally and with the past.